There is a reason some pieces of field gear never make it into the official museum displays, even though they saved lives more effectively than the more celebrated inventions. They were improvised, unglamorous, and often born from desperation rather than doctrine. One such forgotten tool sits buried in military archives and personal journals from trench officers who understood that in a war of mud, cold and ceaseless exposure, heat was more valuable than bullets. Before you even get into the blueprints and the trick behind it, you need to grasp how vital it was. Fire meant warm food in a world of spoiled rations. It meant dry socks when frostbite was claiming feet faster than enemy fire. And in a landscape where men were surrounded by wet sandbags and rotting timbers, any controlled heat source was a lifeline. By the time this small, rugged stove made its rounds through trench lines, word spread quietly between units, not because it was classified, but because nobody wanted theirs taken away or standardized into uselessness. It was, a battlefield secret that outperformed official kit and survived only through scattered documentation and veteran testimony. Now that the viewer is hooked, we dive straight into the heart of the stove itself. The first step to understanding how this device worked is recognizing that it was not designed in a factory. It came from the practical engineering of trench soldiers who were often farm boys, carpenters, railway workers, or blacksmiths before the war. They understood airflow fuel use and, the importance of conserving every scrap of heat. What they developed was a compact, metal-bodied stove built from discarded ration tins, scrap steel, or sections of corrugated artillery canisters. The key was a double-chamber design that channeled incoming air upward through a restricted port, concentrating flame into a hotter, cleaner burn than an open fire. The result was a flame that used far less fuel, produced minimal smoke, and could survive damp conditions that would extinguish larger fire pits. Where a normal trench fire created a visible plume that attracted artillery, these stoves burned so efficiently that officers described them as near smokeless. The stove worked because it used principles we now associate with modern gasifier stoves. The lower chamber handled combustion, while the upper chamber reburned gases that would normally escape unused. This meant a handful of twigs or a few shavings of cratewood could boil water or heat a small pan. In the winter campaigns of 1916 and 1917, this was priceless. Units facing freezing rain, sleet and mud were able to dry gloves, heat tinned meat, and sterilize drinking water without exposing their position. In effect, the stove was a tactical tool disguised as a cooking device. Understanding how to replicate the method today is not merely academic. Anyone involved in fieldcraft, off-grid living, or emergency preparedness can recreate the same design with a basic set of steps. The first practical example involves using two metal cans, one smaller than the other. The inner can is perforated at the bottom and along the lower sides to provide oxygen to the fuel. The outer can is perforated near the top to create a draft that pulls hot gases upward. When nested together with just a small gap between them, The airflow actually forces the wood to burn more completely. And once lit, the stove produces a focus flame that's hot enough for boiling snow, or, heating a skillet. With a bit of practice, it can also be fueled using pine cones, nutshells, or even dry straw that's twisted into tight bundles. The real beauty of this design is that it works even with damp fuel, because once the inner temperature rises, the stove dries its own material. The second application worth mentioning is how soldiers used the stove to control condensation inside dugouts. Contemporary reports describe stoves placed near the entrance of trench shelters, where the upward draft pulled moisture from the air. Recreating this today involves placing the stove just outside a tent flap or lean-to entrance. The heat column naturally draws cool, moist air out of the shelter, reducing internal dampness. For anyone camping in the cold season or dealing with humid mountain conditions, this technique can make the difference between a dry night and waking up soaked in condensation. Another practical angle from World War II records involves fuel preparation. Soldiers quickly learned that shaving wood into thin strips dramatically improved performance because the stove reached working temperature faster. So a modern user can actually replicate this by processing wood into, matchstick-size pieces and then adding slightly thicker fragments once the flame has stabilized. This technique really maximizes burn efficiency and, keeps smoke output extremely low. When applied in a survival setting, it conserves energy and reduces visibility, just as it did in the trenches. So, the last major feature to highlight is, portability. These stoves, often nested inside packs or, hung from straps with wire handles, they were light because they were assembled from scrap. And honestly, anyone who builds one today can achieve the same convenience by selecting cans that nest neatly. The result is a reliable, reusable stove that provides controlled heat, steady cooking and minimal signature, all qualities valued by soldiers a century ago and, frankly, still relevant today. This forgotten World War II survival stove is, I think, a reminder that history's most effective inventions often emerge from necessity rather than design rooms. For those who appreciate historical fieldcraft, studying these tools offers more than nostalgia. It gives you methods you can use when the modern world breaks down. If you found this guide valuable and want more deep dives into historical survival technology, make sure to subscribe to In the Beginning and, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts.